One of the kind of interesting points actually that my sister mentioned yesterday when we were preparing for this was, Sarah, as you were looking back in your career across those industries, who was the first female leader you remember seeing in your workplace at any point in time? And I actually had to think back because I've had 15 bosses so far, and 100% were male in all three of those sectors. And the first female leader I can remember in the private equity workplace, which was my first job, was actually a female partner investment professional in China, where women tend to take, statistically, they tend to have more leadership roles. Some of it's down to just the way the population landed. But she was a real active supporter of a project that I led at the private equity firm when I was in my first job. And while I didn't have any direct male leaders, day to day, I'd say it's been probably my mother who's been the role model in these industries, because sometimes if you can't see them where you are, you either have to be the role model or look to the right and to the left in other industries to find kind of inspiration to move up. So even though we're a full generation apart, it doesn't seem actually like too much has changed immediately, if these are the 2020 stats. But there are ways to navigate, which I think we'll talk about shortly.
You want to add a little something, Françoise, or do you want to move on to the
Go
next?
for it. Go for it, Leslie.
Okay. So asset management is the field that I'm in. And I'm sure we've all heard this statistic that there are more men called Steve running asset management firms around the world than there are women. It's a silly little statistic, but I think it can be mirrored in other company groups as well. And I have found, just like our two other panelists, that you're obviously very much in the minority, and you're obviously requiring a mentor who might inevitably be a man, not inevitably. Funnily enough, the first woman I remember in business was my sister-in-law, Pat. She wasn't my sister-in-law then, but at a very young age, I remember seeing her as a banker walking around with, looking very, very smart. I know this all sounds a bit old-fashioned, with her Wall Street Journal, and I thought, wow, she's doing something really cool. I think I want to do that. But there is no doubt it was sort of an emblem really that I could follow. But now that I run a business which has 89 people in it around the world, I am well aware that the most useful thing I can do, in addition to being morally encouraging and emotionally encouraging, is to provide practical solutions for people. How do people take time off to have kids? How do we make it work for them? How do we get them back into the workplace? How do we give them flexible working, and the fathers too, because in the old days, it was always the ladies who stayed home, looked after the kids. And certainly in my business, there are one or two men now who are expressing a desire for a more flexible working environment. And it's expensive to offer that, paternity leave and extended maternity leave. And after we increased our maternity benefits, 5 of our ladies, and there are only, I think, 35 or possibly 38 ladies in our company, 5 of them got pregnant. And I was like, that wasn't what I meant. But I mean, it was good.
Yeah,
but it
it changed a lot. I mean, when I had Sarah and Rachel, there was no maternity leave. At the International Monetary Fund, they gave us 3 months off. At the US government, there's nothing, nada.
Yeah. I mean, nowadays, I think it's becoming an imperative, and everyone should I would advise everyone to make sure they really understand what their company offers, even before they join. Just, what sort of company is this? I know everyone's very keen to get a job, but at least understand, what sort of a place am I going into? And if I'm going into one that isn't family friendly, and of course some of them aren't, and that's their choice, you just need to be aware of that, I think, and think quite hard about it. And what can you do? Are you allowed to start an affinity group in your company, for example? Are you allowed to be a pioneer in this area? And that, I think, can be very helpful, but there needs to be for the seeds to grow, I like to garden, and for the seeds to grow, you've got to put them in the right soil, and they've got to fit. That's the other thing. I think people need to find what they're good at, and they need to really think about, what are you good at? where do I fit? What am I really good at? And be quite harsh with yourself. Don't pretend that, you know, you're a basketball player when you're only 5'2", you know, just really look at yourself and say, what am I? You know, what can I do? And then once you get into a job that really plays to your strengths, you'll have much better chance of being noticed, I think, rather than trying to stride around being something that perhaps, you know, your personality doesn't suit. So practical steps, mentors, as Emily and I think Sarah said, and finding companies where the environment is right, or encouraging affinity groups to start, and then know thyself, as they say, the Greek saying. I'll shut up now.
No, not at all. So that's really interesting, you know, the planting the seeds to grow, right? And so, you know, during COVID, with everybody homebound, you know, and we're all sort of separated from our teams, you know, we're connected virtually, but, you know, physically we're separated. How do you think COVID and working from home is going to change things? Is it going to kind of make them better, make them worse? Is it a disadvantage or an advantage? What would you all think about how COVID has changed this landscape?
Well, Sarah, why don't you start? You've been stuck at home for 5 months.
And in fact, I just hired 8 people to my team entirely virtually, 8 full-time and 4 interns across the summer. So majority of them I'd never met in real life before at all yet, still. So that was pretty exciting, across the world, different countries. And in fact, the summer interns who were undergraduate interns just did their report out yesterday of their summer project, and it was fantastic. They've never met each other. They've never met me. They spoke to hundreds of people around the world because they were in different countries and all connected. We pretty much covered, you know, we could work 24 hours a day because we were all situated in complementary time zones. Mm-hmm. And they did a fantastic job connecting. So I think actually having this shift to virtual become the norm is going to give us access to a lot more diverse talent that if you had a restriction on, you know, you must work in London, you're not necessarily going to get to tap into some of these individuals who perhaps go to universities in a different location or don't have the socioeconomic backing to be able to afford to fund a summer in London. So I'm really excited about my next round, you know, thinking differently about, okay, where in the world do I want to source talent for the type of project that I need to tackle right now? And one project, it might be India, one project, it might be Argentina, another, it might be more relevant to have someone who's French speaking, you know, if I'm looking at a specific challenge. So for me, it's actually, despite the economic downturn, it's been a really eye-opener in terms of that the access to intellectual and thought diversity that I can have very quickly just by giving.
Without the barriers of where you have to be located.
Correct.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. Emily, Leslie, do you, either of you, Leslie, you're on mute.
Thanks.
There you go.
It happened to you, right? You, Françoise, you carried on working and just moved cities.
Yeah. I haven't been at home, so I've been working remotely. But yeah, so it's interesting because there are people out there saying that the lack of connectivity with the office culture that they've already had, right, is playing as a disadvantage. But then you have Sarah's situation where she's like, that actually opens up a whole host of new opportunities for me. Leslie and Emily, what do you think of that?
Well, I mean, I've been working, obviously I was with Sarah in March, got out of London on the 14th, the last day before the border shut. Now we're both British and American, so I could have stayed and I could have come home in any case, but I got out. So I've been in Florida, which by the way, isn't too bad of a place to be, and I'm back into swimming. And I'm working now helping temporarily Small Business Administration do the disaster loans. So I'm an actual loan officer and I'm 10 hours a day, 6 days a week in front of my computer, helping people across the United States get these loans. And it's great because I don't have to look good or be anything. I just have to be sitting at my desk. So you lose the commute time and all of that. So fine. The economy is a massive downturn. It's one of the biggest ones we've ever seen. It's a significant upheaval. And I think the people who probably have the most difficulty are people who have distractions at home. You have children, spouses. I mean, there's no way you can do this. How can you keep a kid on school and be doing loans that are pretty complex at the same time? So, and then you don't have, if you've already knew the people in your workforce and you got stuck in this story, it's different. If you've never met them and you've had no socialization, I think it's going to be a real challenge, but it may be the new normal. And I don't know, Leslie, what do you think? I mean, it just may be the way it is, and we'll adapt.
Exactly. I suppose the benefit is to be able to pick and choose between the two, because as Sarah said, there's benefits to the ability to be truly global, if you like, or sort of virtual and global. But I really find that a lot of, you know, I trained as a salesperson. That's where I had my whole career really until I took the job I'm doing now. And realistically, I pick up a lot of nonverbal signals when I'm with people. Yes. You know, a lot of body language and a sort of sense for how comfortable or uncomfortable are they, and just that being in the same room is just, and you know, it just, to me, it's pretty crucial. Plus I have all this staff and I've got to keep chasing around finding out what the hell they're doing. You know, where are they? You know, what are they up to? And obviously I've got senior management to help me, but it's very different when you've got, you know, all 80 of you in Windsor and, you know, 3 in Zurich and 3 in New York. You kind of know where everyone is. You can look around the office, you can all see them. But when they're all off in different places, it's much harder. It's, you know, a bit like herding squirrels sometimes, you know.
Well, it's a different level of trust in terms of operating. You have to assume that the people who are working for you are actually doing what they're doing when they say they're doing it.
Exactly.
And that we didn't have to do before because we knew it, we saw them. And there's always that bit of what are they doing exactly? In the US government, by gosh, you have to click. You have to log in, you have to say you log in, and they're looking at your productivity by hour.
Yeah, interesting, because I think there's a lot of people. So Francoise's dad, my husband, works for the National Trust. And they've let a lot of people go. And we were discussing it this morning. And I said to him, you know, I wonder whether they had a lot of people who weren't doing very much and they couldn't really say anything or do anything. It's, you know, a government, quasi-government organization. And, you know, they were looking after these wonderful places, these wonderful buildings. But sometimes I think there will have been quite unfairly the opportunity to just slim down the workforce, which, you know, here we had paid up barrier level of what they would have earned if they were working, and now that's dropping away, and I think we will see a lot of unemployment, sadly.
So just hopping off of Leslie, what you've just said, you know, we'll see a lot of unemployment. Circling back around to this theme of women leaders, right? So what, in each of your careers, what have been the perceived sort of barriers that you've encountered personally, relating to being a woman leader? Do you feel that you've experienced barriers and setbacks and specific obstacles, or do you feel that you've actually, you haven't experienced those? How would you describe that for your career?
Go for it, Emily.
You know, I don't consider them barriers or obstacles. When I was going through it, it was life and I just did it. Mm-hmm. But I can tell you, as you look back, I mean, at the International Monetary Fund, sitting in the board for the United States, there wasn't even a woman's bathroom on the floor.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. And, you know, so whatever. I was never working in a place where there were any women in senior roles. It was always all men, whether it was at the IMF, the EBRD, Citibank, it didn't matter. Did I think about it at the time? No, I just went and did what I did. As I look back, I could say there were obstacles and barriers, but the key is really just do your job, be aware politically of what's going on around you, but deliver the goods, because if you deliver and they see what you've done, you'll get those stretch opportunities and be able to be promoted through the pipeline. But I think in terms of me, I was always open to change and I took opportunities. So I pivoted quite a bit. I continued to learn and change. So, you know, government, international, then Citibank while I was at Citi, I'm a 9/11 survivor, so I was on the 9/11 Commission, learned a whole new topic on emergency preparedness in my mid 40s or whatever that was. Then went back to Citi and ended up doing the partnership with Citigroup and learning all about the United Nations and the World Food Program. And then I was back at Citi, and then I went to the Middle East and lived for 4 years working for banking. And then I learned nanotechnology at my late 50s, and now in my 60s, I'm in blockchain and crypto. So I pivoted, I learned, I took advantage of opportunities, and I didn't consider it an obstacle or a barrier.
Yeah, no, I can see that. But you know, there's another thing I think too, which is interesting. So you're quite scary, Emily, in a sense, because you sound incredibly accomplished and very, very successful. And I'm sure you are. So I think if I would say to young people, you know, us older ladies who've been doing this for a while, we look really good. We look like we really got it sussed. You know, Emily probably has got it sussed.
No.
You know what I mean? You know what I mean? So the point is, don't be intimidated, because actually, underneath it all, you know, however good we look, we have our days where we think, oh my God, what am I doing? You know, so you must never be intimidated by people, male or female, who look so good. My mother once told me that when you got nervous and you were dealing with people who intimidated you, just think of them as a field of cabbages, she said to me, which seemed like a really weird thing to say. But in other words, try not to think of them as, oh my God, these incredibly accomplished people. The other thing women have that I think is really an advantage for us, good, not always clear, but I ask a lot of questions and then we really to the answer. Whereas all the men have ever much preferred the sound of their own voices than the sound of anyone else's voice.
You might have to say that again, because you cut out. I don't know if you cut out for other people.
Okay. No,
Yeah.
where did you lose me? The intimidating
the other
bit.
thing you said, no, the other thing that women have, yeah.
The other thing that, well, it's really important too. I've noticed with all the women I've worked with and all the men, women are really good at, often very good listeners. And they're also good at asking questions, and they listen to the answers. Men tend to be more keen on telling you, you know, they'll tell you, all the guys in my office, they want to tell you how it should be. And the women go, now, so how would you go about this? And what do you think? And they listen, and then they take, certainly in sales, that's very, very powerful. You've got to have something to say as well. But if you're a good listener, and many women are, and you're a good listener and you really ask good questions, you'll find out. People will always tell you in the end what you need to know. My last point was something that I read somewhere. It's Madame de Pompadour, who was the mistress of Louis XV. She said something that I've always remembered. She said, not that I spoke to her literally, she's 18th century, don't make a fuss very often, but when you make a fuss, make it count.
That's great. Thank you for that. And then Sarah, you know, perceived barriers, do you feel that you've experienced them? Do you feel that, you know, in this generation that we're working in now, that it's not as common? Do you feel like, Emily, that you don't perceive them as that? How would you define barriers for yourself?
So I'm a young woman, I guess, young professional woman, but also in a senior role. So I'm launching a new division for a global company. You know, I won my first $1 billion transaction in my early 20s. So I've actually moved quite quickly through my career. And I think one of the kind of misconceptions that people have when they immediately look at me is they assume I'm more junior than I am. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing you can do about how you look, you know, aside from, you know, trying your best. But as soon as usually I get to speak and perform, the perception changes quickly. So I'd say that's one, you know, just a kind of initial assumption. And I had a female colleague who actually gave me a great tip around just owning who you are. If you're in the room and if you're at the table and you have something to say, so you should speak. You know, kind of own the skills that you've built. If you feel that you don't have confidence in a specific area, go learn it. I mean, one of the things I definitely took from my mother's experience is you're never too young or too old to learn something new and to pivot. So my own kind of professional toolkit I have filled with learning. So I did my undergraduate degree while also working full time. I did a law degree while also working full time, did my MBA between Columbia and London Business School while working full time. There's never a moment where you can't take a step, arrange your calendar to learn something new if you feel that's going to give you confidence or push you to that next level. And I don't think I'm done learning. So I think, you know, understanding yourself, knowing what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, playing those up where you are strong, and just owning your space, and practicing wherever possible on safe stages before you speak, before you meet with people, building that kind of team of supporters, whether it's in your family or your friend group, who are going to give you sound but also honest advice. That's something I've definitely had, both, again, from family members, but also good and strong female friends who've navigated similar situations, even in parallel industries. So I think barriers, I mean, there is obviously, the math shows you that there aren't many women in the 3 sectors that I work in, and I'm in them. But it's more about how do you build your skill set and position yourself and really have that strong voice at the table.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I think practicing with your network, like before I ever give a major speech, and my first one when I was trying to explain blockchain, and I had Sarah and 2 of my girlfriends here in the living room with the speech on the TV, and we didn't get past the first page. Like I couldn't explain it. So that practicing in the safe environment was very helpful. And I always do that. You always practice before you ever do a major presentation. And I think, Sarah, you took that class at RADA, which was pretty helpful.
Oh, wow.
Because
Yes, so I'm not sure if one of our RADA coaches is on the line, but they have a series of courses at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art that are specifically tailored to female professionals, but also female executives. And it's about how do you manage your voice, how do you manage your breath, how do you manage, oh, Sheila is on. Hi, Sheila.
Hi, Sheila.
How do you, you know, control your message so that you're heard? And it was super powerful. And I then kind of launched a side program. I led a women's network with around 500 women across the UK and Ireland, and put some of the senior top talent through that program because it was so powerful. And it's also something you need to practice. You don't do it once, you do it 100 times.
Absolutely.
So you're not born being able to be CEO. There's a lot of work that goes on in between to get you to the stage.
So that's fascinating, right? To hear each of your own sort of personal experiences, you know, around in the workplace and these perceived barriers and how we see them, whether they are as barriers or not, or whether, you know, in hindsight we look at them a different way. But you know, I want to just circle back onto the pure fact that there aren't many women, right, in these areas. Why is that? Like, why do we think that is? Because we obviously have you 3, which is fantastic. Do women feel, you know, maybe as we discussed, do they feel intimidated? Is there issues with, like, you know, the hiring and the talent pools? What do we think it is? I mean, I just want to pose that question because I think it'd be interesting just to get to that stat, because it bugs me, you know, it's in my mind and it bugs me. So if anyone wants to take that, go for it.
Leslie, you look like you want to take that one.
Yes, I think I know. Well, I've got a suggestion anyway. And actually, it came from one of your colleagues, Françoise, who did a bit of training for us at Record Currency Management. And she said that if you compare, and this is gender specific, because that was your question, if you compare women and men will go for a job when they think they know about 40% of what they need to know to make a go of it. And women will hold back until and this would probably be true for a number of things, volunteering for a project, you know, stepping up to do something. They will expect to know, they will hold themselves to a higher standard in the sense that they will say, I need to know 80% of what I have to have under my belt to go to even try and compete for this job. Now, these were statistics that came from your company, Françoise, not from me. And it does seem as though there is some kind of deeply embedded reticence or lack of confidence. And I see it at work. I see women, we have the CFA, which is one of the qualifications people can go for, and we fund that for people. A lot of people do CFA 1 and they all pass, male and female. A fewer do CFA 2, it's considered much harder, and fewer still, hardly any women go for the 3rd level. They could all pass it. And when I ask them why, they say, oh, I don't know if I'm good enough, you know. The guys just kind of go barreling in there and, you know, hope for the best. And some of them fail, but they don't seem to mind. So I'm sure it's quite deep. I don't know what you think, Emily. Am I on the wrong track or the right one?
No, I agree.
I was going to say, I have a slightly different view. So I think when graduating university, there are more women than men. So it's not a plain problem. There's plenty of educated women coming in. Mm-hmm. At the C-suite, it's small. We talked about the 5-6%. I would differentiate CEO, C-suite, and board level C-suite, because there's a difference between governance roles and then C-suite managerial roles. And I had the pleasure at a very young age to be a director on a board for 4 years. And it was part of getting young professionals on boards. So I got to experience the difference, the very concrete difference between governance and management, where you're kind of setting strategy and direction, and then on a managerial side, executing it, and then bringing people, processes, and systems along on that journey that ultimately you're being governed towards. So I would differentiate those two and ask ourselves, how does one as an individual develop those two sets of skills to be either C-suite or governance level? And it's not something that happens by accident. It's something that in kind of mid-career, individuals are sponsored into complex projects, sometimes deemed high risky, maybe transforming a business unit that's failing, or they're given the task to start up a new region. We're breaking into a new region, here, go after it. And I think one thing that's not measured or discussed too often is how many of the people who get picked for those tasks that are ultimately career making or breaking are people in diverse categories. And I'd say that broadly, like women, people of color, all types. And I think there is a conscious and unconscious bias still, even within kind of Western developed worlds, that if you've got that risky, hard task, it's a safer bet to go with the thing that you're most comfortable with. And it's those mid-career, like late 30s, early 40s, those tasks and assignments that if you don't have someone that gives you that chance, no matter how hard you volunteer, you're probably not in the room that's making those decisions. So you need, if you're in those positions of power, where you get to choose how projects are assigned, who gets to speak at the presentation, you have to think, how can I raise up voices that are not otherwise being heard, give them that platform and give them that chance. And from the individual's perspective, it's if someone, you need to be seen doing work so that when those opportunities come up, you're the one they think of to slot into that space and give you that chance. So I'd say my personal view is it's that middle ground, that middle career space where we have plenty of pipeline. It's not women leaving for taking care of kids any longer. Many companies have progressive policies, including the one I work for, where both men and women have maternity, paternity leave. So I don't think it's that. And I also don't think it's them not asking. There's plenty of ambitious women, and particularly in the younger generations coming up, and plenty of ambitious men. But when push comes to shove, the individuals making the decisions are that next generation above, and we're still not quite there yet. We're not giving everyone the same chance.
Do you think, it's funny. Yeah, Emily, did you have to be better than all the guys?
No, but I didn't, I never got the chance to really be a leader. I mean, I had great positions in what I did, but I was always the doer. I was never running anything. I was the one, chief of staff to the head of global banking at Citigroup. Okay. It's a huge job, 100,000 people, 100 countries, whatever. But I was the one pulling it all together. I wasn't the one leading it. I never got the leadership slot. In the public sector, I did, because I was political appointee representing the United States. But in the private sector, I never ran a P&L. I was never given any of those opportunities. I was always seen as the doer. And yes, I had stretch opportunities, but they weren't going to make me head of a country or, head of anything for that matter. It didn't mean it wasn't good and I didn't make a lot of money and it was valuable and useful and interesting, but I never got that chance.
So are we saying it's changing, but hasn't quite changed yet, Sarah? Is that what you're saying? It's changing, but it's not happening quick enough.
Correct. And I think, one of the things that I like to share with people is a lot of the times you think it's someone else is going to make that decision for you. And, I'm not senior enough. I must not have any influence or control. But actually now in the age of technology where each of us has a lot of platforms, email lists, networks, we actually have a lot more control and influence on what types of voices are being raised to the table, because the table is now virtual, and whose voices are we promoting outside of our own, and how are we creating space for other people to rise up. And I'm very conscious about, when I get asked to speak, who could speak in my stead, and who would have a great story to tell, and what stretch projects can I create to showcase a skill set that perhaps a person isn't, in their official day job showcasing. And I think those are things that all of us can do. Obviously if you have more power, you're at hiring positions. My team's 55% female. I made those choices. So where you can make them with the best talent and the best caliber, because there's plenty of talented people. And where you can't, see how you can use what you control and influence to raise other people up.
So it's happening, Françoise.
It is. We're trying to make it happen on this call right now. So just jumping off.
Well, the thing is, 4 of us have not met.
Jumping off of what we've just discussed, right, there's this idea that, Sarah and Emily were describing, which is this middle part of the career where people are not being raised up. And it's this mentors and sponsors aspect, which is so important, right? And you get that from your network. So, at creatives around the world, we really focus on the importance of connection and collaboration. How important do you think these 2 principles are in developing your career, and is having a strong network key for getting those positions and moving up to the next level as a woman?
I think it's critical, but it's critical within the context you're working. Meeting random people and talking, they could be advisors, you can use them as consultants, but your network really has to be in the space that you're in. And at Citi, where we were in 100 countries and 300,000 employees, and I'm chief of staff, I'm running around the world, every single job that I have gotten has come from that network because they saw me work and deliver. So it wasn't the random people I met at Davos or the IMF annual meetings, or they were all valuable and they're interesting connections, but everything that's real that's happened to me all came from delivering in the community within which I worked.
Yeah.
And it doesn't take away from those other connections. And there are many of that I've made through the years, like Sheila, for example, who's on the phone. We've met lots of people. Val, whom I met in Davos. Okay, so I met Val, who brought us to this table when they were trying to go to a party, and I was at a party in one of the hotels in Davos, and these 2 girls started talking to me, and they seemed really sharp, and I figured if they figured out how to get into Davos and get into this hotel at a young age, they really know what's going on. And we chatted for a while, and here I am. So those connections that you meet around the world can be very valuable, but the ones that actually produce the goods, are the ones you're working with who see exactly what you can deliver, in my opinion.
Absolutely. Completely agree with that. There's all those different levels, and there are just going to be a few critical people to you in your life. Sometimes you don't even know who they are when you meet them, but it definitely works that way. I would agree.
So it's not, I think what you guys are thinking is all these connections and all this is really good. And it is great. And LinkedIn is really helpful because you can remember the person you met. But what really counts is the people who remember that project that you actually delivered and how good you were. And they're the ones who call you back. I mean, I spent 4 years in the Middle East working for 2 Citi bankers who were CEOs of banks. Why did they call me? Because they knew I could do it because they saw it with their own eyes. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't a cocktail party. It was real hard work. And for women, unfortunately, men, maybe it's not so important, but for women, we have to be seen to be delivering to get that opportunity in my history.
That's what the Queen says, right? I have to be seen to be believed.
Sarah, what do you think of the networking and the kind of connectivity aspect of that? Do you think that's very relevant for you as well?
Yeah. I'd say I'm very good at keeping in touch as well. So it's not just around just meeting people, but it's the people that are really important to you that you stay close to your whole life, whether it's on a friend basis or on a professional basis. And I'd also say how you kind of broaden that network to groups that are different to you. So both to keep yourself like intellectually fresh, because you can learn so much from cross-pollinating ideas across industries, across sectors, as well as genuinely different kind of geographic backgrounds. So not what someone looks like, but what they have kind of culturally experienced being different can bring different angles. And you know, growing up with both my parents focused on emerging markets, and having as a child been to, I mean, every continent before I was 18. I'm very observant, I guess, and also having moved kind of 10 times before I was 18, very observant, very adaptable. Thanks, Mom. And I think those types of kind of connections and network that you can continue in your adult life as well, really important to just building a more well-rounded worldview. And I think that helps you adapt when new situations come that surprise you. You have much more breadth to rely on from your background and your experience, the more you've experienced. To help you navigate things you haven't come across and come out on the other end successful.
You know, one of the questions I get asked the most, Franny, when I'm networking with young women is, how do you be a mother and a spouse and do a global career? That is the number 1 always asked question that's on their mind. How do you do it? Well, I mean, there's obviously you have to have a supportive partner. And in my case, I ended up mostly as a single mother, but I never slept. I certainly didn't have time to learn golf and play golf with the guys who were in banking, that's for sure. Had a lot of help, which meant you have to have the financial resources to have that help. But you plan every single minute. And fortunately, my 2 daughters, and Rachel's on the line now too, she's a lawyer in California, they didn't require me to tell them to do their homework. I mean, I was fortunate. They were really smart and with it, and I didn't have any problems. If you have disabilities or whatever, it's hard. And I moved them, as Sarah said, 11 times. I never said, well, we have to stay here because my children are in school. No, I told them, sorry, guys, you thought you were in that school, but guess what? Tomorrow we're moving back to London. And it was not so great on some of the occasions.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Tears don't you? But we're definitely stronger because of it. But yeah, in the moment, I think you were lucked out with us. We were kind of transportable.
Yes.
Yeah, but I think, I don't know whether you would agree with this, Emily, but as a mother who works, I think you live with guilt. I mean, I don't think it's possible not to. So you
It's
kind
really
of
Mum, you cut out again.
Not very often.
Mum.
Oh, sorry. I was saying you live with.
As a working mother, yeah, carry on.
So as a working mother, you live with guilt and you kind of put up with it. And I think Emily was agreeing with that. And then what you have to do, I think, which is nice, and I have noticed this with women who don't work, when you're with your kids, it's a really special time. You make it the most of it, because, you know, it's not that you're there all day and every day and always around. And actually, I think your kids appreciate you a bit more too. I might be wrong. Françoise, did you appreciate more? I was
do I have to comment on that right now? But yeah, no, for sure, definitely. I think it's, you know, it's nice to have somebody to, you know, as a mother to look up to, as a girl, you know, to see someone working very hard. And, you know, my mum always said to me, you should make your own money. It should be yours and nobody else's. You should never have to rely on anyone for any money, you know, no man. So that was always a great lesson that I learned from my mum that I still can, you know, still hold dear to this day. So yeah, I think, you know, there's pros and cons to everything, right? Like nothing is ever perfect, and it's always going to be a constant balancing act. But, you know, I do appreciate the expertise and, you know, the knowledge that I grew up around, for sure. That's definitely something that.
It's the walk the talk, you know, not talk the walk. You're watching an example.
As you were saying at the very beginning, Emily, you said that, didn't you? You have to lead by example, in a sense. And
my mother did that for me. I mean, she taught the deaf, and I was scanning stuff during COVID, because what do you do with the front hall closet?
Oh, photos, old photos.
You know, and I found a letter she wrote me, and she put a poem about dreams and dreaming the impossible dream and doing whatever you can do. And that was instilled in me from the very beginning. And she passed away at 59. So Sarah sort of met her, and Rachel never got to meet her. But she taught the deaf, and she was the one she'd never been out globally. She'd never really traveled. She did have a master's degree. She was very professional and worked very hard, and a very people person, but she believed that you could be whatever you want to be. And I was fortunate to be brought up with that instilled in me. So I never thought differently. I never even imagined there was a barrier. No one ever told me there was a barrier. So
maybe it's our job, Emily, you and I and all of us like us, to try and be mentors to people in addition to our own daughters. To try and fill in.
I think we have a number of them probably on this phone on this call right now, because Sarah and Rachel's friends, you know, I have helped how many gazillions of people with their CVs, with writing their essays to get into college, with giving career advice, and then their friends. And I think it is really important to be able to help anybody who needs help. And I'm not sure we're totally current, Leslie, but we can give our version of how we saw it working, because I know the story that you guys are in is vastly different. And I think this COVID thing is going to change it. It's going to be a turning point in the way the workforce goes and what's happening in the future. It will somehow work into a new normal, but we are definitely not there yet by any stretch.
So Emily, sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
You know, so I think one of the things is, you know, how do you hold yourself accountable to some of these metrics as well? For example, I set a kind of quarterly goal for myself that's published, like with my team, but also internally in the company, on, you know, how many hours of coaching I'm going to do, how many hours of mentoring I'm going to do, how much time I'm going to spend, you know, volunteering. And all of this is kind of on top of the day job, which is building partnerships with private equity firms to drive digital transformation in the companies they own, in an entirely new division. But if you can quantify those hours and hold yourself accountable to those personal goals and how you're going to kind of give back to your network, again, how you're going to raise people up, build that into your regular operating rhythm, you can do it even if you're not already CEO. there's a lot of ways, you know, there's always someone, one behind you and one ahead of you, and you can mentor up and down. There's plenty of people who I speak with who are, you know, technically older than me, but, you know, there's plenty that I can add in terms of value from seniority at an early age. So I think don't undervalue your own advice with whatever level of experience you have, because there's always someone else right behind you and someone else in front who might benefit from your new perspective. So I love the concept of reverse mentoring as well. And there's lots of ways you can seek it. So an example is I took an evening or a language course at King's College London, and my business language course in Spanish, just to refresh. And I was taking classes with 19-year-olds. I mean, I don't hang out with 19-year-olds in any other environment, but it was awesome. I now have a bunch of 19-year-old friends. I was learning a ton in Spanish. So there's many ways that you can connect. And I love the cross-generational pieces as well, because there's a lot you can learn from people coming up and a lot you can learn from people who have more seasoned experience.
Yeah, exactly. I have heard it said that one of the strongest teams has a young person, someone in the middle of their career, and someone at the end of their career, all working together.
I like that concept.
It's a nice one.
We have a question from the audience, from Sheila McNamara. And, you know, Sheila wants us to expand on this importance of sponsorship versus mentoring. You know, how do you select the women you are prepared to sponsor? So what's something that you look for in somebody that you're going to sponsor? Which I think is an interesting question, because for anybody listening who may be wondering how they can be sponsored and how they can find a mentor, it might be nice to know how you identify those.
I'll give you an example. I was at dinner the other night on my birthday, and we were sitting across from another table and 6 feet apart with our, you know, and we were chatting, and the father said, yeah, my son he just graduated from college. And he said, no, we just have to get him a job. And I said, well, what'd you major in? He said, business and marketing. And I said, well, I could really use some help, because I've got a lot of projects going and I could really use some help. So my friends at my table said, the guy's never going to call you. Well, he called, and he's been here for 3 weeks. So how do you choose somebody you sponsor? It's when they actually answer you.
Yeah.
They follow up. They deliver something. They get the opportunity, how much of a sliver of opportunity it appeared.
Yeah.
But they take you up on it and they appear. And
That's
by God, and on top of all that, so the first day he's here, he said, well, I think, I said, you can go now. You've been here for a couple hours. You know, you've done what I've asked you to do. And he said, yeah, I'm going to have to call an Uber, and I don't have a car. I said, okay, well, I can call you an Uber. How come, you know, he goes, well, I don't have a driver's license. I'm like, you don't have a driver's license? He said, no, I have cerebral palsy. And I'm like, oh my God. So here's the kid who graduated from college and has taken me up, has showed up, and he's handicapped to boot. Okay, guys, those are the people you sponsor, in my opinion.
I agree. There's another one too that I think is kind of interesting, and it's going to sound rather selfish, but as a boss, because I've got all these people working for me, when I start to look at our interns, I notice the ones who actually try, and when you give them something to do, they come back with the problem somewhat solved, as opposed to coming back with something with just a lot more questions. So if you give someone a job, you know, and it could be any job really, if they come back with a solution, they've got something fixed, they've done something, they've moved it forward, you think, and it may not be, who knows, it might not be right, but the point is, what they're trying to do is, as a boss, they're trying to make my life a bit easier, and they're trying to move things forward, as opposed to just moving things around on the desk, which doesn't really get you anywhere. So I look for people who are sort of doers, and a bit like you're a young man, really. They just get things done. They get things done. And I don't care really whether they were, you know, at Harvard or wherever they were. If they get things done, some of the smartest people I've ever met couldn't make a decision. They're so analytical. It takes them half an hour to decide whether to have a tea or a coffee, because they have to think about every aspect, you know, and they just can't make up their minds. I'm like, just choose, you know, choose, just move on. So I look for doers. I look for people who get things done.
Sarah, what about you?
Yeah, people who can make decisions is one I would say as well. And it doesn't matter how little or how big they are. It's they're willing to go with it. And then if it's doesn't turn out as they planned, they don't blame anyone else. They take it and they learn from it and they move to the next activity. So I'd say people who can take those types of ownership of their actions and then change when it needs to change if it didn't work out. But from the sponsorship perspective, I think because that's something that's coming from the individual who's choosing to sponsor them. I'm looking for definitely doers, but people who I think maybe have need for coaching and stretch. So I see something maybe in them that they need to practice and flex that muscle a bit more. And it could be public speaking. So, you know, throwing someone into a public speaking situation early on, and prepping them and coaching them in the background until they rock it and then letting them shine on their own. So I'm looking for kind of angles that I think I could stretch, even if they're just minor skills or minor tasks. So yeah, I think seeking ways to help, and it requires you to be really proactive because you have to be paying attention. You have to be coaching the teams to know where they have strengths, weaknesses. So it does require a lot of effort, more than just kind of waiting for them to reach out to you.
Can I make one point on the mentor piece? I think the key aspect on mentorship is respect, and it's respect in both directions. And without that, no one can be a mentor. And sponsorship is a bit different because they can sponsor you because you can deliver the project. And they give you a stretch because they know you can do it. A mentor is someone, in my opinion, that both you have to respect and admire and believe in to be able to want to be learning from that person, and vice versa. Whereas sponsorship is more believing that you can actually do the job. That's a fake distinction that I just made up, but I kind of think that is what Sheila was getting at in the question, in terms of what's the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. Yeah.
Well, thank you all very much. I see that we're approaching time, and I want to just invite Val to come back in if she is around, if she wants to sort of give us our sort of summarizing comments. But thank you all very much for your insights, for your experience, for sharing your time, you know, for sharing your own personal career journey. It's been fascinating to listen to each one of you and to hear your answers to our carefully crafted questions. Val, do you have any final comments you'd like to add?
Well, absolutely. I think I really enjoyed being on the other side of this panel and listening in, because a lot of the times I don't think I get to retain much of what all of the speakers are saying. So I'm first of all very grateful for all of you to really being so organic with all of your thoughts, and for Emily to sharing that story, because it's actually quite funny, because I think a lot of the stuff all of you touched upon are things that I have personally experienced, or for instance, you know, being intimidated and in certain gatherings where you are sort of working with a lot of older and more experienced and seasoned executives, as Sarah, you mentioned. But and that's something that actually, when Emily and I met in Davos, I think what we actually spoke about was much around this topic of, you know, owning how you carry yourself, and sort of even if you are the younger person, and when you're a woman, in these gatherings, you sort of just own how you carry yourself, and also own the areas of your life where you fall back on. And something we talked a lot about, Emily and I did, was our appearances, and how how that oftentimes is a stereotype that people think takes you forward, and how do you, you know, sort of, so there's a lot of things that I think in this discussion that we have touched upon, and I think it's a much larger conversation, but we all need mentors and sponsors such as yourselves. So thank you so much, and I'm really, really grateful. And Fran, Thank you so much for moderating this so well.
Thank you
And
for inviting me, Val.
yeah, so I'll
You
leave it
know,
at
one of
that.
the things I thought, it's maybe because we're the mother daughters, but you can see how easy it is for us to speak together
Yeah.
versus four separate people, because we're all comfortable and
Yeah.
we're having a natural conversation. And while we've never tried this before, and thank you, Sarah, for agreeing to do it,
Thank
it actually is quite profound because of the connection between us. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but what do you guys think? I thought it was more
I think
natural.
we should all get together for a glass of wine. That's what I think.
Absolutely. When I come back to London, if they ever let us go anywhere.
And Sarah, I would like to reach out to you, but also, Emily, I would like to talk to you about what you're doing now, because we have a cryptocurrency project that I think might be interesting just to chat over.
Yeah, happy to help. We'll do that.
Fantastic.
All right, guys. Thank you, Val.
Thank you, everybody.
All
Have
our
a
family and friends who showed up.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.